Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip classroom and our discussion of absolutism in Russia. That's right. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to everything. And welcome back to this crazy stuff that we're talking about that's going on in Russia, right? So we spent all this time in class talking about this crazy story. Ivan the Terrible, of this scene right here, of him killing his own son, and then, of course, of our favorite character in class now, of Fedor going on and taking over the throne of Russia, right? Oh, Fedor, F-E-O-D-O-R. Has any name ever hit so hard in, history? I don't think so, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is, remember, he's up there watching over all of y'all and stuff like that. Everybody wave to Fedor when you get back into class. Say a little prayer before your test to Fedor if you need, all right? The big thing about it, though, in the long run is we now have to pick up where we left off in class, right? So we've got a new family that has taken over the throne of Russia, and it's this family known as the Romanovs, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is the Romanovs are going to take over the throne of Russia, and they are going to rule as several different absolutists and stuff like that throughout most of Russian history. So a big thing that you need to understand is out of all the different countries that we've talked about in Europe, right? Not England, not Spain, not even France a little bit. Well, France did have the absolutist, right? Louis XIV. But when we're really looking into this whole thing, the big thing you need to understand is that Russians have had absolutists for an incredibly long amount of time, right? There was never really there were, of course, always ones that were weaker or stronger than the other, right? For example, Fedor wasn't the best king on the planet, but he did keep Russia pretty stable for quite some time. But when you're looking at the absolutists of Russia going into the 1700s, we're now going to talk about one that actually came to power after while Louis XIV was alive, and a man that actually would have met Louis XIV and the most prominent Russian absolutist of the 1700s, right? And his name is Peter the Great, and he looks not like this, but like this. All right, so interesting little cameo change, right? What is so weird and different looking about this Russian king, right? Looking very stereotypical Russian, and then this Russian king named Peter the Great, right? Well, the thing about it is, this is what Peter's the best known for, right? So Peter Romanov, comes to power in the late 1600s, right? In the late 1600s, he actually had to share the throne with his brother when he was a young man due to the fact that his father died when he was very young. He ends up taking the throne when he's about the age of 7 or 8, and he has to rule with his brother, Ivan. Don't let all the Ivans confuse you. The only one you need to know is Ivan IV, and you need to know this guy, Peter the Great, right? So looking at the whole thing, though, he had to survive all this crazy political tumultuousness stuff going on, but Peter the Great is a very prominent Russian figure because he outsmarted his own sister, outsmarted his own family members, and went on to become a very, very strong, intense ruler of Russia. But the thing he is best known for is westernizing and modernizing Russia. He is going to be the one that takes Russia from being believed to be an Eastern place, turns it into what you would consider as a Western European nation, right? If you go to Russia in the modern era, Ava Bodine, we talked about this in B period, if you actually go to Russia in the modern era, you can see McDonald's, you can see Starbucks, you can see Western European things, and they are considered to be very European at this point. And it's all because Peter the Great takes them down that path, right? This dude is very, very prominent and very important because literally he took a big tour of the West so he could figure out how to make Russia a little less Russian and a little bit more Western, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is he did take a journey to the West to go tour all these other countries, right? And it's actually known as his Grand Tour, okay? So do me a favor. Jot that down next to took a journey to the West, okay? It's very important that you understand that. What this is called is his Grand Tour. He actually took 200 different nobles with him, and they went on a big tour of several other different countries, right? And he went to 3 specific places. Make sure you write these 3 places down. He went to the Netherlands, he went to France, and he went to England, right? Now, he actually went in the order of, he went to Netherlands, England, and France, and he went for several different reasons, right? He wanted to actually go to them so he could learn how to modernize Russia and learn from these Western Europeans by what they were doing. He actually dressed in a disguise, right? He actually had a big disguise on, took all these nobles with him, had them dress as well, so they didn't stick out like a sore thumb like rich Russian bureaucrats and stuff like that, because it was easy to spot a very wealthy Russian. They wore these really big coats, they usually had facial hair and stuff like that, and usually had very, very prominent, sharp facial features, right? But he wore a disguise. But the funny thing about it is on this trip, He was pretty easy to spot because, oh, I don't know, he was 6'8". Peter the Great was a massive dude. He was literally 6 inches taller than Mr. Terry, right? He was 6'8" and had surprisingly small hands and feet. Anyway, but Peter the Great, though, goes on this tour. He goes to the Netherlands to learn about their trade, learns about building boats, learns about the East India Company, and understands that, man, a big thing about power in the West is being able to trade. So this gets into his head, and he's like, you know what we Russians need more than anything else? We need a city that we can trade from all year round. Problem is, though, is Russia's a landlocked country. So he keeps that in the back of his mind, and we'll come back to that thing a little bit later. But then he goes over to England with all the nobles as well, and he wants to learn about naval fleets and big militaries and how to be more like the military power that the British were. Goes over there and learns all about that stuff. And then he goes to France, and he ends up in the court of Louis XIV. He ends up in the court of the Sun King himself. He goes and he visits the Palace of Versailles. He goes and meets the young grandson that will one day become the next ruler of France, a little guy by the name of Louis XV, right? He goes and he meets all these different people, and he realizes how to run a government like an absolutist, right? He realizes tax infrastructure, financial institutions, how to make money, how to build big palaces, and how to do all these different things. And he also realizes that if anybody in Europe talks about politics, they're speaking one language. They're speaking French, right? So he sees all these different things, and he goes back to Russia, and he brings all the things that he learned with him. He starts developing the Russian Navy, a la the British, right? He starts developing all these different things, and he creates Russia into a massive politically important state. All that stuff that I just talked about is fair game on this test, even though 5 things are only written on this slide. So you need to remember, any of the stuff that I talked about is fair game. Did you have to write every bit of it down? No. But did you need to know a bunch of it? Yes. All right, so going into it, though, as well, you have to understand all the big different things he did. When he comes back, he also creates a bigger and better military. Now, to keep this under mind, Ivan the Terrible actually created the very first professional military in like Russia, but Peter the Great grew that military to a standing army of 210,000. A massive military that he learned from the British people how to create and how to develop. But also, this is one of the biggest things he realized. When he got back to Russia, he's looking around the streets of Moscow. And he's looking around and he's like scowling, I guess you could say. And he's like, we are bringing these military ideas. We are bringing the ideas of the West back to Russia. But we have a problem. Our Russians don't look like Westerners, right? So he actually starts doing a lot of cultural changes as well. He begins to bring a lot of really intense new things to Russia. For example, he wrote a book of Russian manners, right? Talked about how you should actually eat more like Westerners, having multiple utensils, having these different items that you can actually use to dine with and things like that. How to actually like conduct yourself in a conversation much more like a Westerner, right? He also outlawed something very interesting. He outlawed beards, right? He said, Russian men, if you come into a big city like Moscow, you best shave that beard, right? Because beards are now outlawed in our cities, much like the men in the Western countries, like in France, England, and the Netherlands. They don't wear the beards. So you know what? Snip, snip, get rid of it. All right, so now interestingly enough, though, you could keep your beard if you wanted it, but you had to pay a tax, right? Like, so you actually had to pay a thing called a beard tax, which is really, really funny. So going into it as well, though, he also brought more rights to women. Because in the Western countries, like in France, women could just exist. They could walk around freely and do the things that they wanted to do. Whereas in Russia, when Peter left to go on his big trip, women actually had to wear veils over their face when they would be outside in Russia. So he comes back and he's like, no more of that. You let the women show their face. You allow them to exist in court. You allow them to attend functions just like anybody else would, right? So he actually brings some more rights to women. Now, not a ton of rights, but he does at least let them like show their face, which is a development in the right direction. You should have given them all the rights that men had, Peter. But at least you're trying, right? So going into the frontal area as well, he starts doing all these other different things. He does all these major works. Also, another little cultural change. Let's add this down there as well. One little fourth thing right there. He made it so if you want to talk to him about politics, whatever, there's one language you better speak, and it better be French, right? So he said that if you want to talk about government and that all nobles must learn these different things, they need to learn how to speak French, and that's what they will like speak to me when we talk about the government. He also even forced nobles to go off for at least 5 years and study in other Western countries for at least 5 years to learn those different habits and learn the growth of these different ideas. But there's one thing that we still haven't brought back up again yet, that nagging thing. That nagging thing in the back of Peter's mind, right? That idea where he was like learning from the Dutch and he was like, true power comes not just with military, not just with politics, but also comes with trade and making money, right? And so he saw what the Dutch did. He saw that the Netherlands had their East India Company, and he saw the trade vessels that they had. And he was like, our biggest issue as a country is we cannot make money quite like the Dutch do because we do not have a city where there is a warm water port, right? So a big thing you need to understand is write this down real quick. He desired a warm water port, right? So what he ends up having to do is he has to go to war with Sweden, right? He goes to war with Sweden, and after a bunch of kind of missteps, and he almost lost outright early on and stuff like that. In this process, he realizes that I can win this war. He comes back with a full force, and he takes a very large swath of land from Sweden, and it has access to the Baltic Sea. And in that area, standing on that beach, when he looks upon that warm water city, or that warm water area, he decides to build a city in that land that he won from the Swedes. And he builds the city of St. Petersburg, his warm water port city that never freezes over, right? So like the city of St. Petersburg, the water there is warm enough time of the year so they could actually open up trade. And look at this city. That does not look culturally Russian. Does that look like St. Basil's Cathedral right here? No, it looks like a modern Western style European city. It looks almost like the facades of Paris, like those of Amsterdam, right? And he creates this city based on that image of the West, right? And that's why it's considered the window into the West. It is literally considered this place where the West begins now, right? He also even though went on as well to create it as the Russian capital. And also, just a heads up, did he name it after himself, St. Petersburg? No. He named it after St. Peter from the Bible, right? Now, probably a little bit after himself as well, but this literally was that warm water port city that brought new goods and ideas to Russia so he could develop the Russian economy and create that Western place that he always wanted to create. He went on further to make a large trade city. It expanded over time, and he built a palace of his own, just like the one in Versailles, but a little bit different, using Rococo-style architecture rather than Baroque, and it was known as the Winter Palace, and it is still there today in St. Petersburg. It is one of my top 10 places I want to go to before I die. But that right there is the Winter Palace, and look at all this different state that was created under Peter the Great. That might be one of the better flips I've ever recorded, because I'm just saying, I feel like it all made sense. But going into it, go study for that test, go use that Quizlet, go do your thing. I will see y'all soon. Y'all have a great one.